Chapter 5: Integrating the Unconscious, the Process of Individuation. As observed throughout the previous chapter, even though the process of individuation is already extreme interest to the individual, Jung even argued that such a process, if widespread enough, could prevent events similar to World War I from happening. According to Jung, even though wars are fought between nations, there is a strong connection between the nature of the individuals representing the nation and the nation itself. Only the change in the attitude of the individual is the beginning of the change in the psychology of the nation. As a result, Jung argued that the problems can best be solved from the bottom up, through a change within the individual, as opposed to rules and laws imposed from above. The great problems of humanity will never be solved through general laws, but always only through the renewal of the attitude of the individual. This change of the attitude of the individual is one of the central aspects of the individuation process, whereby the main goal is the discovery of the entirety of the self, including the unconscious characteristics of the individual. Samdasani observed in the introductory volume of the Black Books that, according to Jung, the origins of the outbreak of World War I could be found in repressed, irrational ideas. After the French Revolution, irrational religious ideas and other beliefs lost their dominance, resulting in this repression. As Samdasani indicated as well, throughout the Black Books, Jung attempted to accept and understand these irrational factors, thereby ending their suppression within his own psyche. In this sense, one of the main purposes of the Black Books was for Jung to have an outlet for his own irrational dispositions. Jung came to the conclusion that in the end, these irrational tendencies could be connected to an individual rational side, resulting in a more integrated individual. Eventually, this would, according to Jung, benefit society as a whole. As discussed in the second chapter in relation to the importance of the unconscious, Jung argued that one unconscious is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, if it is not integrated, it will have an overwhelming power over the ego and thereby limit our free will. On the other hand, if we succeed in integrating our unconscious, the unconscious can serve as a powerful compensation force. Jung argued that every individual can make his or her own choice in accepting the need to become aware of one's unconscious mind. If he voluntarily takes the burden of the completeness of himself, he need not find it happening to him against his will in a negative form. Therefore, as discussed previously, if an individual does not recognize the importance of the unconscious, this can have some serious negative consequences. As a result, we can conclude that integrating our unconscious can be a worthwhile effort. How can we integrate our unconscious and succeed in the process of individuation, according to Jung? The unconscious and the soul. Throughout this chapter 1, we'll use the term the unconscious and the soul interchangeably. I will not make a distinction between both terms because, according to Jung, becoming aware of one's unconscious is similar to becoming aware of one's soul, as well as the other way around. The German word this Jung used is this regard, Seele, is in English usually translated into word soul. It can be argued, however, that the term Seele encompasses a lot more than merely the soul. As a result, it is useful to look at the definition of Seele soul provided by Jung. As indicated in chapter 3, Jung's definition of soul is a lot more comprehensive than the term suggests at first. Besides, the unconscious soul, according to Jung, serves many diverse functions. I, your soul, am your mother, who tenderly and frightfully surrounds you, your nourisher and corrupter. I prepare good things and poison for you. I am your body, your shadow, your effectiveness in this world, your manifestation in the world of the gods, your effulgence, your breath, your odor, your magical force. I believe that this definition provided by Jung illustrates that the unconscious is a part of the soul and that most of the activities of our soul occurs unconsciously. Moreover, Jung's definition shows that the soul is not only positive force. Embrace the shadow and chaos. Becoming familiar with our unconscious is not a straightforward process. As you may have noticed from the definition of soul provided by Jung, not only positive force resides there, the soul is a part of a corrupter, a shadow, a poisoner. What an individual might find when he or she ventures into the depth of his or her unconscious might therefore be horrifying, making it hard to move forward. At the same time, many temptations might lure one away from one's path. However, as Jung indicated in the Red Book, in order to discover the content of one's soul, it is required to confront the more frightening parts of the souls as well. You dread the depths. It should horrify you, since the way of what is to come leads through it. You must endure the temptation of fear and doubt, and at the same time knowledge to the bone that what you fear is justified and your doubt is reasonable. How otherwise could be a true temptation and a true overcoming? Moreover, besides becoming frightened of what one might find, Jung believed that during this process of familiarizing oneself with one's unconscious, one might believe that one is heading in the wrong direction. This is the case because one will be met with chaos and a lack of meaning. This is, however, normal, according to Jung, because chaos belongs to the world just as much as order does. Fundamentally, according to Jung, one should carefully investigate the aspects of oneself which one might dislike, or which scare the individual to some degree. They are just as much a part of us, except they might have been suppressed because the individual or the individual's environment might not have liked them. Jung proposed some ways in which an individual could become familiar with these less favorable aspects of oneself, the shadow. Balancing consciousness and unconsciousness. Besides allowing disorder and meaninglessness to come into one's life with the purpose of finding out more about one's unconscious, Jung further argued that it is of crucial importance that an individual should find the right balance because consciousness and unconsciousness. On the one hand, if one is too conscious, unconscious characteristics might be neglected. On the other hand, if one is too unconscious, one might not have a sufficient footing in the world. The first step to integrating the unconscious, as observed by Jung, is finding out whether one is the master of one's unconscious world, the soul, or whether an individual unconscious world, the soul, is in control. Jung argued that if one concludes that he or she dominates the soul, then this individual should surrender to the soul. In case one concludes that the soul is in control, then one must take control over the soul. It is not necessary to be the psychiatrist in order to observe that most people are probably too conscious. This can be problematic because, as argued by Jung, unconscious forces might then take control suddenly in the dangerous fashion. One should therefore find the right balance, meaning for most people that one should focus more on one's unconscious world. The world of unconsciousness must now be labeled down in favor of the reality of the unconscious. Room must be made for the dream at the expense of the worlds of consciousness. In more practical terms, this means that the individual should carefully consider his or her character traits and see where he or she might be out of balance. Jung used consciousness as an example. Individuals who are extremely conscious might attempt to let go a bit more, thereby consciously losing some control and, as a result, giving away some control to one's unconscious. It is not a question, as one might think, of relaxing morality itself, but of making the moral effort in a different direction. For instance, a man who is not conscious enough has to make a moral effort in order to come up to the mark, while for one who is sufficiently rooted in the world through his own effort, it is no small moral achievement to inflict defeat on his virtues by loosening his ties with the world and reducing his adaptive performance. The same can be illustrated with the example of two other character traits, thinking and feeling. Jung observed that some people prefer to think, which can make it difficult for those people who enjoy life, because those their overemphasis on thinking, they lose some capacity for feeling pressure. Others prefer to feel, which might make them too reckless. Through their overemphasis on feeling and pressure, they might, according to Jung, become young and blind. Jung argued neither side of these character traits are ultimately good or bad. Instead, a balance might be best. This overemphasis on either thinking or feeling can be problematic and is relevant to our present discussion on the integration of the unconscious, because those individuals who think too much can push their feeling into their unconscious, while those who feel too much can push their thinking into their unconscious. However, as Jung observed, aspects of oneself felt in the dark will not disappear. Instead, they will continue to develop as well, albeit in a more unpredictable manner. He also preferred to think than to feel, leaves his feeling to rot in darkness. It does not grow ripe, but in moldiness produces sick tendrils that do not reach the light. He who prefers to feel than to think leaves his thinking in darkness, where it spins its nets in gloomy places. Because either thinking or feeling remains in the dark, someone who feels does not trust his or her thinking, while someone who thinks does not trust his or her feeling. Although one does, therefore, not pay any attention to their thinking or feeling still exist within the unconscious. Embracing the aspects which one has neglected is therefore, according to Jung, an important step towards the integration of one's unconscious. The importance of myths, religions, and mysteries within the process of individuation. As discussed in Chapter 4, Joseph Campbell observed that myths serve a vital role as a bridge to the unconscious, even though myths might not be compatible to our definition of the truth. Their function as a metaphor might reveal an even deeper kind of truth. Jung indicated this importance of myths as well. Myths, like religions and fairy tales for children, can be used to better understand unconscious events. This is the case because they symbolize events which cannot be consciously grasped. We need a symbol of metaphor in order to understand them. Jung argued that for this reason it is important for children to be exposed to fairy tales and other stories, since the symbol and the metaphor present within such stories can aid in the assimilation of unconscious elements. The same applies to adults, for whom various religious or spiritual ideas can serve the same purpose. In our scientific age, in which everything is scrutinized by science, symbolic ideas have become neglected, thereby losing the connection between the conscious and the unconscious. Jung considered this to be a dangerous development because, besides losing the connection between the conscious and the unconscious, irrational ideas cannot be balanced in such a society. Jung believed that this would make individuals more susceptible to dangerous ideologies. In order to integrate our unconscious, it might therefore be worthwhile to become familiar with some of the myths that have been so inspirational to our ancestors. We might learn that we are not that different and that the ideas which we now believed to be false might be true, albeit in a different way. Turn your desire inwards. Another important reason which can help explain why it is hard to connect with our unconscious, according to Jung, is that we are directing our attention solely to the external world. In order for us to connect with our soul, Jung argued in the Red Book that we should direct our attention inward, to the unique world of the soul. According to Jung, only the individual who is not entirely dominated by the external world will be able to enter the world of the soul. If we turn our attention inward, Jung observed that we might find that the world of our soul is a desert. It is up to us to, by directing our creative energy inwards, fertilize the land of the soul. If your creative force now turns to the place of the soul, you will see how your soul becomes green and how its field bears wonderful fruits. Jung believed that it could take a long time for the fertile lands of our soul to become green. Waiting might be too long for some individuals. However, if one then throws him or herself back at the external world, he or she will forever remain subject to external world, and the process of individuation has inactively failed, since then it will have been clearly proved that this man is incapable of enduring beyond things, men, and thoughts, and they will hence become his master, and he will become their fool, since he cannot be within them, he cannot be without them, not until even his soul has become a fruitful field. Jung stressed that this does not mean that by directing one's creative forces inward, one will be neglecting the external world. Instead, it means that the individual will not be dependent upon the external world. Such an individual still requires many attributes, from the external world. However, according to Jung, these external factors will not control the individuals. Intentions are limitations. In relation to the discussion on the external and internal world, it is interesting to analyze how we behave in both worlds. Usually we set intention for those who want to become or what we want to achieve. In particular, in the external world, Jung observed, however, that our intention might in fact limit us. How little we still commit ourselves to living. We should grow like a tree that likewise does not know its law. We tie ourselves up with intention, not mindful of the fact that intention is the limitation, yes, the exclusion of life. The same applies to the moment at which we try to familiarize ourselves with our unconscious. We go in with an intention that a certain desired outcome, however, those intentions might limit us in what we might discover. We believe that we can illuminate the darkness with an intention and in that way aim past the light. How can we presume to want to know in advance from where the light will come to us? Instead, Jung suggested us to trust the process and let our unconscious guide us, instead of us guiding themselves with certain intention and preconceived ideas of what we might find. This is also what Jung did throughout this process. Jung decided to trust his soul to guide them, even if his soul would guide him to dark places. Practical exercises. Up until now, it might be difficult to understand what Jung believed one should do in practice in order to effectively integrate the unconscious. So far, it has become clear how important this process can be for one's well-being and in which direction one should look. However, what did Jung suggest one should do in practice in order to succeed in this individuation process? First, it is important to note that Jung did not intend to teach us about any particular way in which we should integrate our unconscious. Jung stressed the importance of this journey and shared his own experience with us. But Jung never intended to teach us about a particular way. It is no teaching and no instruction that I give you on the basis, should I presume to teach you? I give you news of the way of this man, but not of your own way. My path is not your path, therefore I cannot teach you. Each of us has a certain way or path that he or she can follow, for which we do not need any external teachings or ideas, according to Jung. Jung observed that such a path can be found in religious teaching or worldly laws. Instead, the true path can only be found within. We can, however, use Jung's ideas to define how one can best go without integrating one's unconscious. I believe that the most important theme that is present throughout most of Jung's works, and which is also very much present throughout Jung's own journey, is that we should turn our creative energies inwards. How we do so is largely up to us. Jung practiced this through active imagination and automatic writing, for instance, which would be an important source for the material for the Red Book and the Black Books. It is the purpose of active imagination to uncover the content of the unconscious. In order to achieve this, the conscious mind has to become silent. In this silence, it is similar to meditation. However, methods which can also be used include all kind of artistic forms. An example of automatic writing, whereby the conscious mind does not intervene between the unconscious and the pen. The most important part of any of this method is to let the image from the unconscious rise up and act themselves out. Whether we want to engage with process of the integration of the unconscious through some form of active imagination, meditation, or whichever other method one might prefer, does therefore not matter too much. At the same time, however, even though Jung emphasized that he could not teach the way, it might still be important to pay attention to some of the Jung's ideas, which I have discussed throughout this book. It might be important, for example, to not set too many intentions because they might limit us. It can further be important to embrace order and chaos because they are both equally part of us. Moreover, it can be of interest to explore the other side of one's character traits, because these might have been expelled to one's unconscious to a significant degree. If one is extremely unconscious, for example, it might be interesting for this individual to arrive late at an event or meeting and observe what happens. Jung believed that the symbol of the serpent is relevant in this regard. The way of light writhes like the serpent from right to left and from left to right, from thinking to pressure and from pressure to thinking. Thus the serpent is an adversary and a symbol of enmity, but also a wise bridge that connects right and left through longing, much needed by our life. Temptation to overcome. Besides these more general points discussed so far, Jung also believed that there are certain concrete temptations one has to overcome in order to be successful in the individuation process. It is easy to succumb to those temptations, according to Jung, because resulting from the inherent difficulty of the individuation process, it is a lot easier to simply surrender to these temptations. The first temptation discussed in the temptation to live according to an example set by others. Jung argued that it is important for every individual to give a direction and meaning to his or her own life. Jung indicated that if one were to live by an example, one would not be living his or her own life. Woe betide those who live by way of examples. Life is not with them. If you live according to an example, you thus live the life of that example. But who should live your own life if not yourself? So live yourself. According to Jung, it can be easy to follow an example set out by others, religions, or teachings. However, if one were to do so, his or her own life would remain unlived. Thereby, one would not be able to connect with his or her own soul, because only the ideas of opinions of others are considered to be of importance. Who then, however, listen to one's own ideas? Jung further argued that if many people were to follow the same laws and teachings, this would not lead to a greater connection between each other or with the world. Instead, it would lead to divisions and solitude. Laws and teachings held in common compel people to solitude, so that they may escape the pressure of undesirable contract, but solitude makes people hostile and venomous. Jung indicated that if people were to be encouraged to find their own path and differentiate themselves from others, they would be happier and the world would be a better place. Jung thus argued that although it is easier to follow the path of other individuals or religions, this can be a dangerous thing. Not only will people not live their own life and thereby not connect with their own soul, but they will also develop contempt for each other and themselves. As Jung indicated in Ion, the world will suffer from this interconflict. Instead, if each were to follow his or her own path, people would understand each other better. May each one seek out his own way. The way leads to mutual love in community. Men will come to see and feel the similarity and commonality of their ways. Perhaps this is the case because if anyone is confident enough to follow his or her own path, the paths chosen by others are no threat to their own individual path, since the only right path is entirely defined by oneself, not by religion or idealism, for instance. Another temptation which can easily turn the individual away from the path towards his or her soul is the temptation of the devil and God. This can be a rather difficult temptation to resist. According to Jung, even Christ failed to resist the temptation of God. Christ totally overcomes the temptation of the devil, but not the temptation of God to good and reason. You will have to learn this to succumb to no temptation, but to do everything of your own will. Then you will be free and beyond Christianity. I do not believe that Jung argued that one should not believe in God or not be religious. Instead, I believe that Jung meant that one should not commit oneself completely to their God or the devil. Instead, one should acknowledge the power of God, power of both opposites, and recognize them as a force to be reckoned with in one's life. A positive and a negative force, similar to God and the devil. This is also true for the other opposite, order and chaos, love and hate, etc. As Jung argued in the Red Book, one should marry these opposites to each other, thereby transcending their individual nature. You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. If you marry the ordered to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning beyond the meaning and meaninglessness. Besides, a too big of an attachment to God, order, meaning, purpose, etc., being a factor that can turn one away from one's soul. Too big of an attachment to virtue can be risky as well. According to Jung, if one virtues hinder you from salvation, discard them, since they have become evil to you. The slave to virtue finds the way as little as the slave to vices. Although virtues are, of course, not necessarily a bad thing, a too big of an attachment to one's virtue can make one slave to these virtues. I believe that Jung means that if an individual is too attached to his or her virtues, this individual might be controlling one's soul too much. As indicated previously, Jung observed that if one is in control of one's soul, one should become its servant. If one is at the service of one's soul, one should regain control. two dimensions. As discussed throughout this chapter, reconnecting with one's soul is not an easy endeavor. This is the case because we have to familiarize ourselves with a world which we often neglect, the internal world. We generally lack an understanding of this internal world, and it can be difficult to surrender some attention paid to the external world in favor of the internal world. Moreover, if one were to decide to focus more on the internal world, there are also several temptations which might lead one away from this path of self-discovery. 1. Following an example. 2. The devil and God. 3. Virtue. I believe that the main theme of all these temptations is that we should be especially careful to not limit ourselves too much. We should not limit ourselves by living by an example set by others. At the same time, we should not limit ourselves through an attachment to God, characterized by order, meaning, purpose, etc. And lastly, we should not limit ourselves through an over-attachment to our virtues. Jung brought all of these virtues together in this discussion of the two dimensions which Jung believed to exist. 1. The spirit of the time, and 2. The spirit of the depths. On the other hand, the spirit of the time can be explained as the dimension in which we live. We go to school, we go to work, we follow the law, and we think we know who we are and what we want. The spirit of the time is always changing its form, and it is in no way constant. The world changes. We ourselves change. Law come into being and disappear again. Wars are fought. Values change, and time goes on. In this dimension, everything that happens can be explained easily. Everything can be rationalized. And at the same time, everything that happens in this dimension has a direct effect on us. As a result, it gains most of our attention. The spirit of the depths, on the other hand, is eternal and everlasting. It does not change. It encompasses all that has ever happened and all that will ever happen. It does not attach value. It does not judge or objectify. From this we learn how the spirit of the depths consider the soul. He sees her as a living and self-existing being, and with this he contradicts the spirit of this time, for whom the soul is a thing dependent on man, which lets herself be judged and arranged, and whose circumference we can grasp. However, since the events occurring within this dimension appear to have a less immediate effect on us, we pay little attention to all that happens in this dimension. This is also the case because the soul and our unconscious being to this dimension. As a result of this dimension being largely unconscious, we are usually not aware of everything which occurs in this dimension. It is up to us to create a bridge between these two dimensions and thereby integrate the unconscious aspects of ourselves which resides in the other dimension. Essentially, this is the most important part of the individuation process. In order to do that, Jung proposed to turn our creative energy inwards. We do not have to do so continuously. We can just continue to live our life within the spirit of the time. However, whenever we have a moment to ourselves, Jung suggested that we might explore the depths and see what we might find. Jung certainly did not romanticize such an endeavor. Instead, Jung stressed how hard this might be. To leave ourselves mean to be one's own task. Never say that it is a pleasure to leave ourselves. It will know joy but long suffering, since you must become your own creator. Jung observed that during this process, one has to investigate the worst part of oneself first. If you want to create yourself, then you do not begin with the best and the highest, but with the worst and the deepest.